Hi folks, Roach here. This is second in the series, Revealing the Holy Grail, titled What is the Holy Grail? Now before we can do that, we have to move from what you think you are to who I know you to be. And if I know, then you'll know. So I have imagery and in this series here, which will help, explain the point more. Now, if you haven't watched part one, I would suggest you do so because it sets up some groundwork and some basic principles that'll be much more useful to you as you go through what I'm about to explain. Okay, so let's get right to it. Now, what you believe yourself to be is a man or woman. Flesh and blood. Some of you believe that you're persons or a person. Now, I don't mean to be sexist here, but I'm going to use this symbol to represent, both man and woman. So just for the sake of brevity and lack of confusion. But when I say man, I mean woman also. So, but that's what most people believe them to be. But there are things that go along with being, a man or a woman. Okay? And they go along with exactly what you are. And it's important to understand these things. Okay? So, being a man, you're equipped with a birth certificate, with a name, and, later you could get a, driver's license, has your name on it, a social security card that has a number associated with your name, and you could have a diploma or a whole host of other things that actually, define you. You could be a citizen of whatever country. You could be a citizen of the world. You could be a resident of a part of the world, or a resident of a municipal, a city, or Now, if you look at the power structure off to the right, we start with a world. There's this world governing body. I use the United States as an example, but I mean it's true for every country out there. You have a world government that generally tells what the nations, tells the nations what to do. In this case, it's the United States of America. The United States of America, then the people in that governing body then tell people, the people in the Texas governing body what to do, which is a subsidiary state of the United States of America. And then there's a whole host of other things in between, and all kinds of different agencies, even your city government, it could be an HOA, it could be a whole host of all of these governing bodies that are basically telling you what to do. In fact, there's so many of these quote-unquote laws and statutes and codes and policies that apply to you that it's very nearly impossible to keep them all straight within a human lifetime. Now, these are all what's called corporations. Now, corporation means a body, a body of people, and all of these things are fictions. Okay, and you have a birth certificate, you have a driver's license, you have a name, you have a social security card, you have a diploma, you're a citizen of the world, or a citizen of the United States, or a citizen of Texas, or I'm a resident, or a whole host of these identities. Okay, these labels. Okay, now these labels are pretty important, because this is how we have convinced ourselves that this is what we are. Okay? Now, all of these corporations are governed by something called a legal system. Now, for me, the definition of legal is a lie we willingly choose to believe. Now, that may not make a lot of sense to you, but there is a profound difference between legality and what is lawful. Okay? The legal system pertains to this person, okay, this corporate man or woman, which is technically a shell that you're wearing. Okay? These corporations are there to protect you, quote unquote, by offering you what's called limited liability, meaning that, as a corporation, you can't be held personally responsible for any damages caused by the corporation. But that corporation is actually a dead body. It doesn't even exist. It exists only in our minds. So, if you noticed on the first picture, there was a little gap at the top of the man figure. So what I want to do is just sort of transition out of the man representation to something a little bit more generic and more in keeping with the whole concept of this in this series. So right now you're a little larva. Okay. Now if you notice, it just seems to be an outline, and there's a reason for that. Now this gap is very narrow, okay, and I'll explain a little bit more what that gap is in a moment. So when you were born and became a little larva and hatched out of the egg, your parents, bless their heart, because they didn't know any better, decided to install you into your first corporation. And they gave it a name, and it is tied together with a birth certificate. Now, the birth certificate actually is attached to the corporation that you're placed into. And as a consequence, all the laws and policies apply to the corporation or the office that your parents placed you in. They don't apply to, the blue part, the living part of you. They apply to corporate fictions. Corporations are fictions. So then the fictional law applies to the fictions. You can't have fictional law applying to something that's real. Okay? So when you were born, they created a birth certificate and they created the individual corporation that you are. And it has an identity, and that identity is associated with that birth certificate, plus all the other paperwork that defines what you are. But that what is technically, it defines the office that you have placed yourself in, or were placed in. Okay, later you put yourself in other offices. Now, as soon as you were born, the lid closed, and lo and behold, you were inside that first corporation. So then, as time went on, and your parents taught you how to speak, and gave you all of the rules to keep you safe, all the rules as they knew it, quite frankly, because they're corporations too. So, in order to keep you safe, they're going to make sure that you know at least most of those that really pertain to you, and so they teach you these things. All right. But the door to your corporation closes, and then there's that little narrow gap at the top. Okay. I'll explain what that is here in a little bit later. Okay, so as time went on, that gap gets narrower and narrower until it's so hard to even notice that it's even there. And that becomes a real problem, because that's technically your escape hatch. And if you don't know your escape hatch is there, then you'll never think to actually look for it. That creates that effectively will keep you inside the corporation. But As time goes on, the system, the legal system, starts placing more layers, more corporate layers on top of you. And just for fun, they put the way out perhaps in a completely different direction. And every time that they suspect you may escape a particular corporation by utilizing that little escape hatch, you have to go through and find the other one that they put around you. So then they add, as time goes on, more and more layers get added to you outside of your original corporation, so that if you escape one, there's always more behind that to maintain your you being within that control grid, within those policies. And they add more and more and more, and it becomes very difficult to to even recognize how to get out of it. And most people don't even realize that those layers actually exist. At some point, there's so many layers that you can't even see. You don't even know where you're at. Now, there are people out there that believe that you can utilize the legal system to navigate the maze that you've created to escape. However, that gets you through one layer. Then, of course, you got to find the other one. And at no time does the legal system or those people that work in the legal system ever show you the way out. You've got to figure these ways out yourself, and that becomes a problem because it's a maze. And for each layer, at some point you give up and you say, well, there's really no escape from this. I mean, it's just too many layers. What can one man do? And while I was doing this, I thought of a Beatles song, "Looking Through a Glass Onion," and that's sort of what that's like. You've got layers and layers of these transparent, barriers, and they exist only in people's minds because they're fictions, and they're so convincing. We've so convinced ourselves that they exist that it creates a lot of fear for us to even think of ourselves outside of that architecture. Where's the safety in that? So the other thing that came to me is actually from a movie, Inception, and the Leonardo DiCaprio character was teaching his architect trainee, who was to manage and create the dream within a dream scenarios, and he said something that was kind of interesting. When he was testing her to see if she was a worthwhile candidate, he asked her to build a maze or create a maze in less than a minute that takes 2 minutes to solve. Now, if you're able to do that, then the people that are navigating the maze, you can always increase the size of the maze faster than they can solve it. So you never get to a point where you can actually escape it. The trick is not to even attempt to escape it utilizing the system as it exists, because the system itself is designed to conceal the doorways and hide all of this. Another way of looking at this is sort of like the Matrix. If you look at the Mr. Smith character, I mean, he was the corporation, and he was going around making copies of himself. And here you had people that were encased in these corporate entities, and he made everybody a corporation. At which point, it was all him. Of course, he controlled all of them. And if you can imagine, just through the creation of these fictional corporations, you can harness an incredible amount of energy and labor and force just by a number of people that just do not realize how even they're being manipulated. So to get back to the entire purpose of this particular video, what is the Holy Grail? Well, the Holy Grail is a tool that, one, aligns all of the doorways. Okay, now these little doorways, these little ways out, these are known in law as remedy, and it's remedy to the law. And what does that mean? Generally, it means that is an escape out of a fiction of law into something that's real law. So once the all of the escapes are aligned, then the Holy Grail will start spreading and making the paths out wider until a point where they don't even matter, and you can escape. Now, when I say you, all right, you might have noticed that I used a little symbol, and it is technically how I'm using it. It's basically an empty set symbol, and that empty set, okay, it's there's a number of ways to represent it. I go to, and the way I use this is specifically this way. Now, empty set, now I got this from Wikipedia. Empty set is a mathematical definition. It is a set that has no members or elements. Okay? Now, because we are cautioned against representing the singular creator being with any type of symbolism, you have to be kind of careful, because every time you actually create a label, you get to a place where you can be confused. So I use this empty set symbol in this way. Okay? In the set of all human action, thought, expression, feeling, and experience, there are no elements or members to symbolize the singular creator being. It's an empty set. It is the I am. It is not it, what, he, she, or them. And since eternity is timeless, it's not a when either. Generally not an it at all. It's a being. Generally, it's all that lies within, but not that which lies without. It's what is in you, not what is outside of you. Now, in order to represent that symbol that is everything that it is not, leaving only what remains. And again, it's not a what, it's all that the universe or your experience is not. You can look at the universe as just simply a reflection of the I am. Okay. Now I'll use the sound on to represent that symbol, but realize that it's not a symbol for the being that I'm talking about. It's a symbol of all of it. It is not. So, for the sake of being able to create an egoic placeholder, so that that you know what I'm, what's going on here. I'm going to use that. I mean, I could just simply, use a gap in the words that I speak in order to represent it, but that would lead to confusion. Now, on is the self, which is the Holy Spirit. It is the being within you. It is the being looking out of the eyes of the actual flesh suit, right? The actual blue part of the caterpillar. I mean, the living being. It is not the corporation that living being is placed in. On is not the living body itself. It is a spirit, it is a consciousness that dwells inside the body. For a time, okay? So, there's the on symbol, and the important aspect of that is within the self is the law. It's also the source. It's the source of the law. It's also the source of love. It's the source of truth. It is all these things, and it governs exactly every aspect of your experience. So, when you look at some of the things that we've been told, you have to be able to grasp some of these terms that they throw around. One of them is apocalypse and revelation, and it sounds really scary because that's a great way to make sure caterpillars stay caterpillars, because nobody would want to go through the apocalypse. I mean, nobody would want to experience revelation. That's more horrible than you could possibly imagine. I mean, look at all the fear. Well, and a lot of that comes from our inability to realize certain aspects. Like, for instance, revelation is nothing more than the revealing. Now, I mean, in Scripture, it says it is the revealing of, God's divine plan. Well, what's God? Well, capital G, that's on. And then what's that? Self. It's the being, the conscious being within you, looking out through your, little flesh larva suit. So then, if you look at another word, apocalypse means a cover or an uncovering. I mean, there are references to it being a leather mask. Now, what's the leather mask? Well, it's the flesh, the skin that you're wearing. When that cover is pulled away, then you know the truth. Well, what's the truth? On. So, who is on? On is the one listening to me speaking right now. On is the one actually doing the speaking. And that's how that works. So, in order to utilize the Grail, now the Grail is a body of law. And within on, the source of all law, I represented it as, the big L. Okay? So in order to empower the Holy Grail, you have to have a knowledge of the law. Okay? Now, as it grows inside you, as your awareness of self grows inside you, the law becomes more important and more empowered, because as you become more self-aware and more conscious, it's more important that the law become manifest. So it grows as your consciousness of who you are grows. Okay, so and once the law is known to you, then you can empower the Holy Grail in order to free yourself. Now, there's a lot of people who they believe that the Holy Grail is a cup or a bloodline. But you have to understand that these are symbolic representations or metaphors for what the Grail is. And you can understand more about the Grail by just simply understanding the symbolism here. I mean, if you look at it as a cup, it is when your self-awareness fills you to overflowing. Okay, so that's the knowledge of who you are becoming so pronounced that it fills that hole you cannot fill, just being the caterpillar or the larva. That's where that symbolism is. the cup that's overflowing. It's overflowing with what? The self, the Holy Spirit within becomes huge. I mean, and the being itself, the being is huge. So therefore, it is perfectly capable of overfilling the cup, and that's the concept of the cup metaphor. There's others that believe that it is a bloodline. Right, the bloodline of sovereign kings that trace back to, Jesus Christ. Okay, or the man who is Jesus Christ. Well, you have to understand that if there were particular families that understood these concepts in law, that they would no doubt teach those to their children. And so it wouldn't be surprising to see that if there is a particular body of law that frees you from all of these fictions and frees you from the control of man, then certainly you'd want to pass that on to your children. That's not to say that all of the kings in the heretical line knew the law. That just meant that there were sovereigns that understood the law sufficiently to pass it on to their children. So this concept, now the idea is, if you're king, the last thing you want is a bunch of other kings walking around, being free. Because, of course, now it just makes it harder. You don't get to just sit around and have everybody working for you. You might actually have to do some work yourself. But the Grail is what makes the king a sovereign. Sovereign being, hey, you are not subject to the will and whims of man's legal fictions and his laws and his policies. You are subject only to the law. So the Grail actually provides a remedy back to your base natural law state. That's handy, because you will find that the laws that govern the universe are certainly superior, actually have power, where the man's law has very little power. And in the next video, I will start going through the law, because the knowledge of the Grail requires a knowledge of the law, such that you can actually employ it. Now, there are some elements of the law that most people don't realize. Let me assure you, the last thing that people want to have been teaching people is these principles in law, because through that knowledge of self and through that knowledge of the law, one can literally break out of the chrysalis and become the butterfly that we all want ourselves to be.